steal by Iverson. Posting in. He wins it. He won the game. Be there to say absolutely no. Three from Scott. Yeah, do you love this game?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome into Sixers Talk, presented by Wilmington University. Willem U Works. I am Kevin Rice. Danny Pomels is back on vacation, I think in Australia this time. I'm joined by NBC Sports Philadelphia's own Noah Levick. So, Noah, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Kevin. Glad to join you.
Thanks for coming on. So, big news in the NBA was James Harden getting traded, and it was not to the Sixers. He ended up going to the Brooklyn Nets for a rather large package. They got a significant draft haul, a couple players, another team was involved in the Indiana Pacers. But I was expecting, when the news was starting to break, I was still expecting it to be the Sixers, and it seemed like a lot of other Sixers fans were too. So, Noah, what did you see, or how did you feel when the news broke that it was the Brooklyn Nets and not the Sixers?
I assumed the Nets would be a strong contender, but I think I understand also that feeling of the Sixers, at least on paper, being the only team who could offer a franchise cornerstone, and therefore being inclined to believe that they were going to get this done. And we all know that Daryl Morey values James Harden very highly, so it sure seemed like there was going to be a reunion there. But yeah, the Nets, they offered a pretty attractive package, I guess, just in terms of draft picks and in terms of flexibility going forward. I mean, including the other first-round pick received from, I believe, Cleveland. We're talking about 4 first-round picks and 4 pick swaps, which is not something that would have been on the table from the Sixers. Yeah. And then you also get Victor Oladipo, who, even if potentially he's not going to be there long-term, is at least an attractive guy in terms of trade possibilities moving forward for Houston. So yeah, really just dramatic few hours there Wednesday that I'm sure, it was very intense for a lot of Sixers fans.
Yeah, I got little to no work done on Wednesday once I think Mark Stein or Shams reported first that it was likely to happen that day or quickly. I was locked in the rest of the day, and then very sad when it didn't happen. But there's been reports here and there, different reports too, of what the Sixers were offering for James Harden and if that price was worth it. Some people are reporting that it was Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, and picks. Some people are saying Tyrese Maxey was involved. So given what the Nets did end up trading, would you have been okay with something along the lines of that trade of Simmons, Matisse, Maxey, and say 2 to 3 first-round picks, or is that too much, do you think?
In my opinion, it is probably a little bit too much, but it's tough because these things don't happen in a vacuum. I mean, as we'll talk later, there are other future stars who could be on the table for the Sixers in a trade, and I personally don't have the intel that Morey and the Sixers front office has in terms of the likelihood that those stars could be available or could be realistic to land down the line. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me, Simmons, Thybulle, Maxey, 2 or 3 picks is probably a bit much. And it's tough because you don't want to overvalue Tyrese Maxey based on a very small NBA sample size, even though
he looks good.
He looks awfully good and has, I think, boosted his stock more than any other Sixer during this period since Seth Curry tested positive. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you do also have to consider that Daryl Morey recognizes what James Harden brings to the table probably better than anyone, and respects very much that he's a one-man offensive machine who would have addressed major holes for the Sixers. Mm-hmm. And I think his evaluation is something that deserves to be trusted to a certain extent, just based on that background. So yeah, would that have been too much for you?
I think before the trade happened, I think I would have been fine with it. And then I think myself, and then I think a lot of other Sixers fans too, are just kind of sitting back retroactively saying, no, that would have been too much. That's okay. Just to kind of talk themselves down from not getting him. I mean, leading up to this I have been saying it's James Harden. You get him at whatever cost to put him next to Joel Embiid. Even if you sacrifice depth, you sacrifice a young star too, or young role player star too. Like, you've got to trade good players to get great players. So I'm on the fence still if it was going to be too much. I love the NBA draft too, so I always like having draft picks to look at. But it stings a little more too that it's the Nets, because now the Sixers really, and then the other team in the East or the West, have no real way of stacking up against the Nets. Defensively, it's a nightmare for any team if those three are playing, because no one has that many good defenders or offensive players to counteract that. So it's up in the air. I think I would have done the trade personally, just because I had the thought of James Harden and Joel Embiid sharing the court together for about 4 months in my head now. So it's a tough cookie to swallow, but it is what it is. And hopefully the Sixers can kind of move forward here and assess how they want to view their team building in the future, this season, next year, the year after that. So I have pretty good trust in Daryl Morey that even though this move didn't get made, he'll make correct moves or helpful moves in the near future.
Sports bettors, are you ready? Are you ready for a faster way to win? When you bet with PointsBet, you get faster bets, faster withdrawals, and faster rewards at your fingertips. All on an easy-to-use app. See for yourself why bettors are calling PointsBet innovative, lightning quick, and the reason they have ditched other books. Experience this premium sportsbook for yourself and sign up with the code NBCPOD100 to get $100 in free bets when you deposit $20. That's $100 on your first $20 deposit. So, are you ready? Terms and conditions apply. Void where prohibited. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Right. And obviously, Ben Simmons, the fact that he was, according to multiple reports, very much involved in these discussions is worth noting, and means that a lot of those potential splashy moves, I think, could be viable down the line, because despite Morey's public comments that they are not trading Simmons, reputable reporting seems to suggest that there was very much a willingness there to do so. And it's interesting, we got to hear from Ben Simmons last night and how he feels about this. And, he's taking it, I guess, as part of the business of the NBA, and a situation where he can only control what he can. I thought Doc Rivers had good perspective. He said, like, when I was not playing well in the NBA, I wasn't involved in trade discussions. And then all of a sudden, when I became an all-star, I was. And I took that as a positive thing that, people recognized I was a valuable player. He said I was never involved in discussions for a player as great as James Harden, obviously. But how do you, if you were in Simmons's position, like, how would you feel about this? Just hearing your name being thrown around there, and just this massive uncertainty about whether you're going to be sticking around.
It's odd, because Simmons has been a player character for a while that I wouldn't think this kind of stuff would get to him. I always thought he kind of not had his head above the clouds, but always kind of knew this is what it was. Like, of all the Sixers, or of him and Joel, I guess, I was including Fultz in that thought, but of him and Joel, the two like main stars the Sixers have had, it's like not obvious, but likely that Simmons would be the one to leave in free agency for an LA in New York. I always thought it'd be one of those. So to hear him kind of be humiliative, and I don't even know if it's the word humiliative, and kind of come out and say, I didn't want to get traded. Like, I want to win with this team that drafted me. I love the city, yada, yada. I mean, it's good to hear. It's got to be weird to hear your name in trade talks, though, of even if it is James Harden, you got drafted by this city, you want to win. You only played in one city for your whole career so far. You're 24 years old. There's a lot going on with Ben. I think we saw it in that game. He had 5 points, fouled out. I don't know if you noticed, but he just looked lost on the court. And obviously, I don't know if this is what it was, but I kind of attributed that to him knowing he's in trade talks, not knowing if his future is with his team, not knowing where he'd be the next week in the country. So I thought that combined with maybe his left knee issues was kind of mixing into him playing lost, playing uncomfortable, playing like a player who didn't want to be traded but looked like he knew. And there was one big tell that I thought during the Harden talks when they were heating up on Wednesday was that the Sixers were reported to include Maxey in the trade, and then were reported by Mark Stein, I believe, to compensate more draft capital to keep Maxey out of it. And how I saw that was that Simmons was then always involved in that trade and was going to be the centerpiece, because if they were trying to get more draft picks in there to get Maxey out, that means they were always willing to part with Simmons. And they were just trying to save another young player from getting traded to pair with Harden. So it was weird. I don't think I'll ever know or we'll ever know what it's like to almost be traded in the NBA.
Yeah.
Unless I have an invincible type scenario where I walk on and make it. So not counting that out.
Good out.
But I don't blame Ben for having emotions or feelings about how he almost got traded from the team he got drafted for, team he's only played for, team he wants to win for.
Absolutely. And last night, though, I think, Doc Rivers wanted to downplay it, and he recognizes that it doesn't hurt to at least publicly emphasize what Simmons does well. So I asked a question that I thought was pretty fair, and it wasn't a gotcha type of question post-game, but just that in this Miami miniseries, teams were sagging well off of Simmons, and I wondered how Rivers thought he handled that. And he was like, look, we shot 54% tonight. Ben had a triple-double. There are no issues there. Like, anything that alludes to deficiencies in Simmons' offensive game, he really does not want to focus on that. He wants to boost up this star, and I think he's not afraid to get on Simmons and encourage him to be more aggressive in these sort of things. But at the same time, he very much wants to boost his confidence, and perhaps even though it's not something he feels is a huge deal, he recognizes that in the wake of this, maybe one's confidence takes a small hit, or there's just uncertainty, like you're not sure about your future and all of that.
All month long, NBC Sports Philadelphia presents Headstrong, Men's Health and Sports. Headstrong, a series about men's health told through powerful stories involving the athletes we love. Learn more on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com/Headstrong.
The game itself, Sixers pretty comfortably beat a shorthanded Heat team, eight men remaining out for Miami because of health and safety reasons. Shake Milton was awesome in his return, 31 points, 7 assists. What were some of your big takeaways from that?
Shake obviously was gigantic, and Tyrese Maxey got the start over Shake, even though Shake was back. I assume just to kind of integrate Shake back from coming off the COVID protocol list, but Shake took that personally apparently because he was not missing, and he was doing it in a variety of ways. It was to the point where him and Maxey both, of every time they put up a shot, I'm like, it's going in, and I'm still surprised when it goes in. But Shake was incredible. Joel, I believe, was the only Sixer starter who didn't end up in double figures. And I don't really care because he had an amazing game on, Tuesday? And to give him a little bit of rest in that short man, even still a short man Sixers team, that was great for the Sixers, for him, just to kind of take a load off, and they still win comfortably. But they beat up on not a bad team, a depleted team, and they should have won by 30-ish. So I was comfortable with the win, glad they didn't have to sweat any of it out. They actually had a third quarter again this year where they held and extended a lead and didn't absolutely cave. So those are the two main things. What else did you see in that game?
Yeah, hit on a lot of good stuff. Just something with Shake. Despite this 3-game absence for the health and safety reasons, that he continues to do well is get to the foul line, and he's being fouled on 14% of his shot attempts per cleaning the glass, which is 95th percentile among combo guards, which is pretty darn impressive. And perhaps some of that is the muscle he added this offseason, in addition to just greater comfort and this freedom he has as the guy who runs the second unit. So I continue to find that encouraging. And then I think another takeaway from last night is Isaiah Joe, when everyone's healthy, might be in the mix. So Doc Rivers was asked, like, when Furkan Korkmaz returns from this left adductor strain, does that complicate things? Where does this leave Isaiah Joe? And he basically said there's room for anyone who's playing well. So yeah, the rookie with 4 threes for his third straight game, continues to be really competitive and attentive and just locked in defensively, really takes pride on that end of the floor. So yeah, he's slight of frame. He's a rookie. He's been thrown into this bizarre situation, but it sure sounds like when everyone's healthy, he's going to have a chance to be part of this really top-level East team's rotation, which I think is pretty incredible. Just bizarre circumstances. And then a funny thing I thought was Tobias Harris talking about this, mandated period where they're away for contact tracing reasons. He said he stayed in shape by being the errand boy around his house.
Yes.
So I thought that was great. He said, opening up boxes, taking out trash and all of that. And whatever the guys away were doing, we didn't mention Matisse Thybulle being the third key player, and then Terrence Ferguson was the other player who did return. But whatever they were doing sure was effective, and it didn't really look like they missed a beat. Matisse, Doc Rivers said this is exactly who he wants him to be. He thinks the offense is going to come. Had one of those very characteristic, just special chase down blocks, I believe, on Achua, where it looked like he was, 6 or 7 feet out of the play, and then he comes up with this remarkable recovery, and it just reminds you that he has these special traits. And he's still a Sixer. He's not a Houston Rocket.
Yeah, that had to be weird for him too, because that's been the public thing of the Rockets wanted him. Sixers fans are more willing to give him up for a James Harden type player. But again, it's a city that drafted you. You played extremely well last year, who shot the ball uncharacteristically well for the first half of the season. And he became not a cult hero, but a Philadelphia hero of sorts, of just everyone loves him for how handsome he is or how good at defense he was. And then all of a sudden you're saying, okay, well, this guy's expendable. You can trade him to Houston. And that's got to be weird too. Matisse, I thought, looked comfortable on defense last night just because he was able to play that kind of free safety role. He did at Washington. He loves playing, of just causing chaos when players aren't looking at him. He had a couple steals from behind. He had a block on Duncan Robinson from behind. They got called a foul that I thought was questionable. The Achua block was awesome. And then on offense, he was shooting the ball, which I'm fine with. It's not a pretty shot, but the fact that he's less hesitant, that he caught the ball, shot the ball, that's perfectly fine with me, especially when they're in a game when they're up 20. I'd rather you shoot and miss and kind of get the kinks out, get the feel for everything back, than try and make something happen off the dribble or hesitate. So that was good. But moving back to Isaiah Joe too, obviously the shooting is there. The Sixers were involved with him for a while. Getting the draft promise leaked again ended up not hurting them because they still got him with the 49th overall pick. Shooting has always been there. It was extremely amazing in college. A lot of draft Twitter were all over him, saying this guy's more than just a catch and shoot player. He can create off the dribble, hit step backs, everything. And then defensively, I know Jackson Frank asked a question last night about his defense, and he was basically like, I'm small framed, I'm really wiry, so I've had to be more intelligent, more physical than I think I should be on defense to kind of make up for that lack of physicality. And Isaiah Joe just seems like a very heady player. He seems more NBA ready than I thought he would be, for sure, especially for someone drafted late second. But he's been awesome. I don't want to say I'd play him over Furkan, but I'm also more intrigued to see what he can offer compared to what we've seen Furkan can do, of just kind of streaky shooting, not the best defender, a little bit improved, but Isaiah Joe is making an incredible argument for real minutes once the team is fully healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I as you said, I didn't give him enough credit for his defense, or just assumed that the lack of muscle would hurt him more than it has. But yeah, something to be said for being an intelligent player, for being prideful defensively. And yeah, maybe we see a situation here where he gets a few of those Korkmaz minutes as they ease him back into it, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's been really fascinating to get to watch more of these rookies. Obviously, Maxi's, minutes extended in a huge way, but also even, Paul Reed, Isaiah Joe, and
mm-hmm.
Dakota Mathias is a hero in the first Heat game. So I guess it's a silver lining of the fact that the NBA season has been derailed in a major way by these COVID concerns. So yeah, I don't know. For me, it's this weird situation where, especially with something like a Harden trade, we're trying to think about the future, and we recognize that it, in all likelihood, has potential massive implications, but it's no guarantee that we safely finish this season.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the last week or so has proved that, and proved that perhaps the NBA wasn't as prepared as it should have been. And we've seen these additional protocols announced on Tuesday, including no guests in hotel rooms, which seems like a common sense measure. And
mm-hmm. There's also the no high-fiving or hugging on the court after games.
Yeah.
And it was well,
play basketball.
Play basketball. So no defenders within 4 feet of anyone. So that's weird.
And there was this report that I think is awfully significant from The Athletic, just regarding the fact that it doesn't seem like the league accounted for the possibility of in-game transmission. They don't
mm-hmm.
count that under the umbrella of close contact. They sort of subscribe by the CDC definition of close contact being within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more within 24 hours, but they don't consider setting screens on a guy or rebounding his shots or any of that to be
sweating profusely for the entire game. Basketball.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty troubling. And just thinking about it, I guess we're now about a week later from Curry's, rather shocking positive test and that whole series of events. The Sixers potentially got pretty lucky that he was injured for that game, that he was out with the left ankle injury and was at least sitting on a bench with a mask, as opposed to doing all those not technically close contact, but sure seems like close contact things mm-hmm. that I just mentioned. So anyway, let's hope for the best there, I guess. Let's just hope that these additional measures are effective, and that the fact that the NBA has access to this frequent testing that many people still don't gives them an advantage and a chance to pull off the season and keep all the people in the league.
Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WilmU work for you. Learn more at wilmu.edu.
Bradley Beal, we have not touched on, other than just alluding to the fact, really, that he might be available. He's leading the NBA in scoring right now. On paper, he's another guy who I think would fit well with Joel Embiid and address a lot of weaknesses that the Sixers have. Big picture, what are your thoughts on Beal and the possibility of him becoming a Sixer before this trade deadline?
This Sixers team, as I see it now, is a very good team when they're all healthy, especially. I think they can maybe get to the Eastern Conference Finals, possibly the Finals, but that's a big possibly. And again, if they're healthy and if they're playing congruently. So I think the glaring need, as you alluded to, is a perimeter creator, a perimeter scorer, and you can sacrifice defense for that if need be, because every team basically that makes a finals run, that makes a deep run in the playoffs, has this perimeter scorer, this wing creator that can get his own shot, create for others, and Bradley Beal is very much that. James Harden obviously was the main guy to go for there if you wanted that archetype, but think getting a Bradley Beal type raises their ceiling, depending on what they end up giving the Wizards too. But Bradley Beal raises that ceiling, I think, to the Nets are here now. But without the Nets, I think that Bradley Beal type raises your ceiling to a conference finals team or a more comfortable finals team where you're not playing in over your head. I am very much in favor of getting Bradley Beal. I know Danny is too, who's been vocal about that. He wanted Beal over Harden. And I just think that if the Sixers are willing to find that trade package that gets you Beal, I think you do it. I don't know what that would look like because I don't know why. If you offer around the same thing as you did for Harden just as a base, I don't know why the Wizards would really want Simmons to pair with Westbrook and the rest of their team. They are the Wizards, though. They do make a lot of head-scratching decisions. So I don't know what that package would look like to get Beal. And if Beal is available, the Sixers definitely aren't going to be the only one involved in those trade talks. So if another team has a better package to offer, then they're kind of screwed in that regard. So what do you think it would take to get Beal on the Sixers?
Right. I would think Maxey would most definitely be someone requested by the Wizards. Yeah, they'd be prioritizing youth, I imagine, in the future, and they do have some promising young players, Denny Avdia and Rui Hachimura, Thomas Bryant, who's unfortunately out for the season. I could sure see Ben Simmons still being attractive, and perhaps them maybe in a year or two looking to move on from Russell Westbrook and recoup something of value there. So yeah, that's kind of how I would see it. I mean, just to me, again, as was the case in these Harden negotiations, I figure that Ben Simmons, I'm not sure other teams are going to be able to offer something quite that attractive. I think your point about potential fit concerns is fair, but I don't know how picky the Wizards can be there, given the state of affairs. Might also be something where it just comes down to which teams are willing to offer the most in terms of draft compensation and what line the Sixers might draw there, how willing they'd be to sacrifice the future and throw chips in to we're going to win a championship in these next 2 years. Like Harden, Beal's under contract for 2 seasons, has a player option in 2022-23. This is mostly gut feel, but my sense is that if the Sixers were to acquire Beal, there's a greater likelihood of him sticking here long term, maybe for the rest of his career even, as compared to someone like Harden. Just given it seems like you're dealing with maybe a more stable, non-confrontational personality that teammates tend to like. Yeah. And I would figure if things, were to go well in that hypothetical Beal Embiid world for those first couple of years, he's still, only 29 years old, and the prospect of spending the remainder of his prime on a contender would probably be appealing, is kind of how I look at that situation. So, it's no given, that Washington's going to give up on him. I mean, their defense continues to be bad. That Thomas Bryant's injury, I think, hurts their prospects for the season if they were hoping to be a playoff team and sneak into that 8 seed or whatever. But it's no guarantee that he's necessarily going to be on the market the way we knew for a very long time with James Harden, that this guy wanted to be traded. He wanted to go to Philadelphia or Brooklyn, and the drama was just which of those teams it would be, is kind of how I look at that situation. But yeah, I don't know. I guess we have a long time as well until this trade deadline, March 25th, and maybe it'll be a little bit more of a slow burn than it was with James Harden.
Look, there's really no other way for me to say it. You're missing out. If you're not playing this, you're missing out. It's the free contests on the NBC Sports Predictor app. They've already handed out over $3 million in cash prizes, and there are tens of thousands more up for grabs this and every week.
So get in on the action right now with the NBC Sports Predictor app powered by PointsBet.
Where do you see the Sixers stacking up in the Eastern Conference? Do you see, I mean, based on what you've said, you see the Nets as by far the favorite? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. People are going to do there's only one ball. There's multiple personalities in that locker room. They have three of the best scorers of this generation, and KD, Kyrie, and Harden now. I was trying to brainstorm a way the Sixers, just in particular, could match up against them defensively, and there is no real way they can do it. What I landed on was Simmons on Durant, Danny Green on Harden or Irving, and then Seth Curry or Matisse Thybulle on the other one. But even if you put Matisse in, then that sacrifices offense. So there's just no comfortable way to guard the Nets. And even if you double down on just guarding two of their three stars, it's not like a 50-50 chance the third one's going to go off. Like it's a highly likely chance the third one with enough space is going to create for himself and almost will his team to win. So if the Nets are healthy, I think they cakewalk to the finals. After them, the Bucks, Sixers, probably in their own tier there. I don't know if anyone else touches them quite yet. Young season, though, weird young season. So, again, if the Sixers would have gotten Harden and the Nets didn't, I think that would have possibly put the Sixers ahead of the Nets just if they just had KD and Kyrie. I am less confident now and not bummed out, but the Sixers, especially with Joel Embiid looking like a legitimate MVP candidate at this point in the season, it would have been nice to maximize what is going to look like the best season of his career to date. And if they're not going to get Bradley Beal, if they're not going to get another perimeter scorer to help them, then it's going to take a lot out of Joel. It's going to take a lot out of Ben Simmons. It's going to take a lot out of Seth Curry, who is the role players are going to have to play above their pay grade, above their role for the Sixers to make a big enough impact in the playoffs. So not to be a gigantic pessimist, I don't see the Sixers getting past the Nets in the playoffs. It could happen. You never know. But realistically, I think the Nets are the behemoth in the East and possibly in the entire NBA now. I don't know who in the West could really beat them either. So this is like legitimately, and I'm young, I'm only 22 years old, but this is legitimately one of the best NBA trios I think I've ever seen or heard of. And it's scary to think of.
Yeah. And I think the fact that Mike D'Antoni is an assistant coach should alleviate some of the potential concerns about how do you share the ball. Like, you know, he knows James Harden and how to make this thing work very well.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say perhaps more valid potential concerns with Brooklyn would just be the lack of depth. They only have 12 players on the roster right now, and not a lot of them are starter level players. I mean, there's some decent players still there, but there will be opportunities for them to add. Perhaps they pick up a helpful veteran or two. I think when you're thinking about how they match up against the Sixers in particular, they're probably even less equipped to guard Joel Embiid now that Jared Allen is gone. So you have DeAndre Jordan, the injured Nicholas Claxton, and rookie Reggie Perry against Joel Embiid. So like you said, yeah, the Sixers, you would imagine if these teams were to match up in the playoffs, would be highly dependent on Embiid. But
yeah,
I think a scenario in which he's like averaging 40 points a game or is possible. And also with the improvement we've continued to see with him passing out of double teams, I think a situation in which Seth Curry and Danny Green and Tobias Harris are getting just a boatload of open looks per game in that series is quite realistic. But yeah, I think, with the Nets, provided everyone is healthy and available, which isn't the case right now with Kyrie out, but provided that is the case, you have to, I think, look at them as a team with just a ridiculous level of offensive talent. I would say I think Indiana, did well in this deal, picking up Karis LeVert. I'm not sure I see them as necessarily like a bona fide Eastern Conference contender this year, but they have a pretty young core all locked in through 2023. So I could see a year or two down the line that being a team that's maybe seriously contending for the East, maybe a team that gives someone like the Sixers or the Celtics trouble in a potential first-round matchup this year. Boston, I mean, there's this – well, number one, there's this big X factor that they've had all these games postponed. Number two, you have, Kemba Walker returning to practice, which is, a reason, I guess, for cautious optimism there, although this knee issue has been plaguing him for a while. And you do have to wonder whether he'll retain his explosiveness and effectiveness and all of that. But at a minimum, he at least takes a little burden off Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And I think Jaylen Brown's play is awfully encouraging for them. That guy just keeps getting better.
I did not see that leap coming from him this quickly this year, but he's
he keeps taking leaps. He took one, he's taken another, which is awesome for them. So yeah, I think it's difficult to discern a lot with much confidence in the East right now, other than the Nets are uber talented, and as you say, if everyone's healthy, should be able to outscore everyone. But I mean, look, Miami's 4-6, and they're the defending conference champions, and I don't think that's a reason to, think that team is suddenly garbage. It's just that they've had 8 players available these last couple of games. Jimmy Butler didn't make a 3-point shot in his first 6 games, which that's not ideal, but we know he's a big game player who has this unique ability to will his team to victories, and he did it last year in really, really important games. So I don't think you can discount them. I think as it stands, it looks like Toronto's kind of out of that picture unless things turn around in a really dramatic fashion, which I'll say surprised me. I thought they would at least be in the mix this year. So yeah, that's how I see it. I think there's a scenario with the Sixers roster similar to as it stands, where they're contending for an Eastern Conference. So maybe I'm a little higher on them, than you, just based on what you said. Because I think having Embiid play at an MVP level, provided he's healthy in the playoffs, opens a lot of things up for those complementary players. It makes the probability of them shooting at higher averages than their career a lot higher. I mean, Seth Curry was shooting 60% from 3 before he tested positive. That's not going to continue, but him shooting, over
is there to make sure, not make sure, but it can happen.
It can happen. Like he could shoot 52% from 3 this year, and I wouldn't be stunned. And Tobias Harris looked like, as we said, he didn't miss a step in his first game back. Pretty much every game he's played outside of the first, he's been aggressive, decisive. There hasn't really been hesitation or uncertainty in how he's played. And if he's like that when games are important, which is a big if, then that also raises what the Sixers are potentially capable of. And yeah, even if a superstar trade doesn't happen for the Sixers, Morey has, rather incredibly, given the position he was in, given them a lot of flexibility. Like, you have the majority of the taxpayer mid-level exception. They have an $8.2 million trade exception from the Al Horford, Danny Green deal. So a 6th or 7th man, say like a PJ Tucker or someone along those lines, being added to the Sixers and really changing the dynamic of this team before the playoffs is possible. Of course, they're not the only team who has the potential to make like impactful roster moves before the playoffs. But they probably have a little more flexibility to do so, I would say, than most of their Eastern Conference counterparts.
The Bucks have kind of decimated their draft capital to get Drew Holiday. The Nets obviously have to get Harden. So I know the Celtics have a trade exception too. Celtics, Sixers, if you want to look at Pacers too, I guess, that kind of arms race for PJ Tucker would be interesting, who's reportedly available for, I think, 2 to 3 second-round picks, it said, which the Sixers definitely have. So it's going to be those margins that I trust Daryl Morey to work, but the margins that you kind of need to hit on to elevate this team as much as you can now to a conference finals appearance, to a finals appearance. And I'm going to look on the bright side here because I feel like I've been negative. It can happen. Like, the Sixers can make the finals over the Nets, but a lot of stuff has to go right at the same time. But if all of those factors perform and if all those factors go right, then they have a serious shot at it. But I think the likelihood of that happening against the Nets or even just before the Nets is a little lower than I'd like it to be right now, without a perimeter creator, without a kind of bona fide bucket getter, I'll say, of a Jimmy Butler type, Beal type, Harden type. And there's more people out there, but again, it would be really cool too if they just relied on Joel Embiid and he had just an astronomical year. But I'd be more comfortable lessening the burden on him and letting him cook when he needs to and having a Beal type now for the Sixers playoff run.
Absolutely. Absolutely fair. The whole East, to me, it feels more of a toss-up than ever. And I guess part of that to me is just these unique and unfortunate circumstances of we're seeing a lot of teams not play games, or the Heat were without Butler and Adebayo and all of that. I guess projecting ahead, you would assume that everyone's available and healthy for the playoffs, but I would again say I really don't think we can say that with much confidence. So maybe if we're thinking, what does that mean from a basketball perspective? Depth's probably more important than usual, which would seem to be a factor potentially going against Brooklyn. I think the Sixers depth is a little better. They're still somewhat reliant on young guys. You wonder whether Shake Milton is dependable as a second unit, like create offense for us, do everything for us when Ben Simmons is off the floor type of guy. But I would assume depth will be more important potentially than in past years. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how that all shakes out.
That's a very good point, especially this year of just, we've already seen it. Not that the Sixers have that extreme depth with Dakota Mathias, Paul Reed getting big minutes and hitting big shots. It's a little bit process era-y to me, of not that I wanted these circumstances to bring that out, but looking at those young guys, Mathias, Joe, Maxey, getting minutes and thinking about how those minutes might get taken away is kind of a bummer. But it's been fun to watch different players, I'll say, kind of perform and set expectations for fans, for writers, for analysts. So, yeah, that's not something I really thought of the playoffs, because, again, this NBA season has been rough so far. They had a lot of credit coming out of the bubble, and they obviously did not prepare enough or are just powering through like the NFL did, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think it puts a lot of players at risk. But they do have more depth than the Nets for sure. The Celtics are another team with pretty good depth. Pacers, decent, I believe. So if come May, June, July, COVID is still not really being controlled within the league, then depth absolutely becomes more important, and the Sixers definitely have that. But yeah, in a general year, the star power definitely helps. But I see your point definitely of depth helps this year.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less so. And just even outside of COVID, as Doc Rivers has talked about, and I think rather compellingly, the chances of guys suffering injuries rise under these circumstances, both because they're trying to jam more games in, and then you're having more and more of these circumstances where he called Danny Green, 1,000-year-old Danny Green is playing 49 minutes. Like, long term, like if he were to continue doing that, the chances of him being injured keep going up and up. So again, let's hope for the best that we avoid that and we get to see all these teams at their best and everyone's healthy. And I don't know. It's going to be exciting if that's the case, and let's cross our fingers that it is.
there's a lot more question marks this year for sure. Nothing's really concrete, even predictions, anything. But that is all the time we have for Sixers Talk today. I am Kevin Rice alongside Noah Levick. Sixers Talk is presented by Wilmington University. Willem U Works. We'll see you next time.